Hey everyone, welcome back to Bible class. What is the sin that so easily entangles? What is the author of Hebrews hinting at or alluding to when he tells us, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off every encumbrance and the sin that so easily entangles? And what does Elvis have to do with this? While it may be impossible to know exactly what the author of Hebrews was thinking, I have some ideas of my own. And they start back in Genesis 13. So let's jump into the text.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
Thank you, Mandy Patinkin. Abraham, Sarah, and Lot are just coming out of Egypt with all of the wealth and livestock they acquired there, and they settle back in between Bethel and Ai, the place where Abraham had built an altar in the previous chapter. But then there was a problem. They had grown so much that the land was unable to support both Lot and Abraham. So there was some quarreling between Abraham's herdsmen and Lot's herdsmen. We have to remember that at this time, the Canaanites and the Perizzites were still in the land. They hadn't been defeated yet. The land hadn't been conquered. So there was only so much real estate to go around. This became a point of conflict between Abraham's people and Lot's people. The text doesn't tell us that Lot and Abraham had a problem with each other, but rather that their people had problems with each other. So, anticipating more problems in the future, Abraham offers a solution. You see, Abraham doesn't want this conflict to get any worse, so he tells Lot that it would be best if they separated. And in keeping with Abrahamic hospitality, he even lets Lot pick where he'd like to go. Lot looks out and sees the plain of the Jordan, and that it was well watered like the garden of the Lord, and that it was like Egypt. So Lot chose to go in that direction and pitched his tent towards Sodom. Now, this is Sodom, as in like the soon-to-be Sodom and Gomorrah Sodom, like the wicked and evil city of Sodom. This is the Sodom that Ezekiel later says was arrogant and overfed and complacent, but they did not help the poor and needy. They were haughty and committed abominations before the Lord. This is the city that Lot pitches his tent towards when he left Abraham. Did I miss something? Where's the sin that so easily entangles? Where's Elvis? Is this another one of them clickbait videos? I'm getting there. I just had to set it up first. So we read in Hebrews 12, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off every encumbrance and the sin that so easily entangles. This comes right on the heels of Hebrews 11, the Hall of Faith, the chapter about the greatest men and women of faith that the world has ever known. And here we are in Genesis 13, the chapter that comes on the heels of Genesis 12, where we meet Abraham, the greatest man of faith the world had ever known. So perhaps the author of Hebrews is suggesting that whatever that sin that so easily entangles is, can be found here in Genesis 13. Maybe it's pointing us to Lot pitching his tent towards Sodom. Now, obviously, we can't know Lot's motivation for pitching his tent towards Sodom. The text tells us that the land couldn't support them both, and it was Abraham's idea for them to separate. So we can't be sure why Lot pitches his tent towards Sodom. I think it's safe to assume that Lot understood what kind of a city Sodom was. They had been in and around the area, and it's not that big of a place. And I'm sure that the people were aware of what Sodom was like. Maybe Lot was enticed by the things that Sodom had to offer. Perhaps worldly things like worldly wealth and prosperity were enticing to him. Or maybe he knew that Sodom was an evil and wicked city. And in the model that his uncle Abraham had taught him, he was going to go and seek converts of that city. We don't know exactly what his motivation was, but we do know the outcome. We have the benefit of hindsight. Fast forward to Genesis 19, and Lot is sitting at the city gate as a leader. What started small, just pitching his tent towards the city, ends up with him fully immersed in the culture of Sodom. And not to mention that his family is also fully immersed in the culture of Sodom. So we know that whatever his motivation was, whether it was good or bad, it didn't work out well for him or his family. So maybe we need to look at this and check our own hearts against the decisions that we make, regardless of our motivations. But let's be clear, Lot pitching his tent towards Sodom is not directly sin. There's nothing wrong with what Lot did here. And you see, this is the tricky part of sin. It always starts with something small and then keeps growing and growing. And before you know it, you're totally immersed in sinful behavior. Like James tells us in James 1, but each one is tempted when by his own evil desires, he is lured away and enticed. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. The alluring and deceptive nature of sin should not be underestimated. Again, it usually starts small. Some innocuous, non-threatening, non-dangerous circumstance or situation. But if that's not dealt with early, it can grow to something completely out of control. It's like an octopus that gets its tentacles around you. What starts off with just a few suction cups attached, it can be quite easily brushed off. But give it enough time, and those tentacles will completely overwhelm you. What's Elvis have to do with this? Well, if you check out this performance of Elvis over here, this was on the Milton Berle Show on June 5th, 1956. Elvis was an up-and-coming star and had a few television appearances scheduled. This was the first of those appearances, and he performed his famous song, Hound Dog, and improvised a few slower final verses to that song. And as you watch it, it seems like it was a nice, fun performance. Well, that was not the way it was taken in 1956. People lost their minds. This was called obscene. This was called vulgar, suggestive, and disgusting. The studio received thousands and thousands of complaints that people's children watched this man perform like this on live television. And the studios were scared to put him back on TV. So they had to go through a whole bunch of measures to, clean up Elvis's image and only film him from the waist up or put a drum kit in front of him so that you couldn't see him from the waist down, because we couldn't possibly let our children see something as evil and suggestive as this. Isn't that crazy? By today's standards, this performance is as benign, innocuous, and family-friendly as you can get. But 65 years ago, this was an outrage and something that needed to be censored. I mean, seriously, compare this to any performance by any modern artist on any TV show. Now, I'm not going to show any of those clips, but you can use your imagination. They are far worse and far more suggestive than these performances were. So, what happened? Well, I don't think there's anything necessarily sinful about what Elvis was doing there on the Milton Berle Show, but I would equate it to Lot pitching his tent towards Sodom. All that it did was set the trajectory for what was to come. It opened the door for more suggestive and more obscene things to start to happen on television because, it turns out, people are really enticed by sin. And while there are those who were outraged by Elvis's performance on television, they probably weren't the majority. Most people probably thought it was fun and exciting and interesting and new, just like today, where some of us will watch what's on television and say, oh my gosh, how can this possibly be aired on television? While others will say, oh, no, this is exciting and fun and interesting and new. I think the secular media is a good picture of Lot pitching his tent towards Sodom. And before he knows it, he's completely immersed in the culture of Sodom. So how do we protect ourselves against this? How do we make sure that we don't start like Lot and, regardless of our motivations, inadvertently pitch our tent towards Sodom and put ourselves in a position that leads to sin? I think that we need to start at Proverbs 12:10. That says, a righteous man has regard for the life of his beast, but the compassion of the wicked is cruel. So what's that mean? A righteous person, someone in right relationship with God, a person of faith, has regard for the life of his beast. Well, on a literal level, one can say that this proverb is about treating animals correctly, which I think is true. We should definitely be doing that. Hashtag don't kill any ravens. But I think more than that, the beast that's being talked about here is the sin nature of the person. The person of faith has regard for the life of their sin nature. As followers of Jesus, we know that we are all sinners. If we say that we have no sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. But each of us is going to struggle with sin a little bit differently. What might be really hard for me might be really easy for you. And what might be a really big struggle in your life might be something that I find very simple and easy to overcome. Each one of us needs to have regard for the life of our beasts. We need to know our own sin nature and act accordingly. To know what traps and pitfalls might be out there for us as individuals and for our families, and protect ourselves against those things, whatever they might be. Like if your family has a history of addiction problems and alcoholism, it might not be a good idea to start socially and casually drinking with your friends. While for some, that's an easy obstacle to overcome, for others, that could become a sin that will easily entangle. Like we've said in other videos, it's certainly not sinful to have a drink, but getting drunk is a different story. That one drink could be like Lot pitching his tent towards Sodom. That in and of itself isn't the problem, but it could set you on a path, on a trajectory that leads to sin, which leads to death. So we need to have regard for the life of our beasts, but the compassion of the wicked is cruel. The wicked person is the one who will tell you that your sin isn't that bad. They will have compassion on you. They will tell you, everyone makes mistakes. Everyone has bad days. Everyone goes through bad patches. That is cruel. That is what a wicked person would say to you, because we know that sin leads to death. The kind thing to do to a non-believer struggling with sin is to tell them to repent, to tell them to turn away from their sin and turn back to God, and that through Jesus' perfect life, death, and resurrection, they too can be restored to right relationship with God. That is true compassion. And if it's a believer that's struggling with sin, they still need to repent. And the kind thing to do would be to teach them to have regard for the life of their beasts, to set up good boundaries in their life, to protect themselves and their family from falling into the trap of sin. The wicked will tell you to stay in your sin, that it's not that bad, that you don't need to repent. And that, my friends, is cruel. So what's the author of Hebrews talking about when he says to throw off every encumbrance and the sin that so easily entangles? What is that sin? While we all struggle with different sins in different ways, the one sin that everyone seems to struggle with is the sin of sexual immorality. While certain people will struggle with it in different ways, everyone seems to have the same problem. God created the covenant of marriage, the boundaries and the context with which marital intimacy is good. But outside of those boundaries, it is destructive. And this, in my opinion, is the sin that so easily entangles us. Oftentimes, sexual immorality begins small, and before you know it, it can grow into something out of control that completely overwhelms you. While the Bible often tells us to wrestle with sin or struggle with sin, it doesn't tell you to do that with sexual sin. Rather, it tells you to flee from it, because that's a fight you're not going to win. Your flesh will rule over you. So all you young single people out there, stop watching movies and TV shows with naked people in them. I know it might be the most popular show on television or something that all your friends are watching and, you're just watching it for the story, but knock it off. This is setting you on a path like Lot was. This is you pitching your tent towards Sodom. While it might seem small and seem like something you can just brush off easily, before you know it, it will wrap you up and completely overwhelm you. What starts with something that's just a little bit bad will grow into something you cannot control. So nip this in the bud before it has a chance to grow. Start filtering the things you put into your mind. Start caring about the things you're looking at, the things you're listening to, the conversations you're having with people. As Paul tells us in 2 Timothy, flee also youthful lusts, but pursue righteousness, faith, love, peace with those who call on the Lord out of a pure heart. Get your mind and your heart off the things of this world and instead focus that time on pursuing your relationship with Jesus Christ. Have regard for the life of your beast. Set up good boundaries in your life. Know yourself, understand your own sin nature, and surround yourself with people who will help you establish and maintain those boundaries. And they'll call you out when you screw it up. Don't surround yourself with wicked people who will tell you that you don't need to repent, that your sin isn't that bad, or that other people are just being judgmental, or that you aren't as bad as some other people. That is wicked and cruel. Don't fall into the same trap that Lot fell into when he left Abraham's household and pitched his tent towards Sodom. Rather, let us throw off every encumbrance and the sin that so easily entangles.